So what I really want the urban rewilding movement to do is really, as I say, challenge those perceptions of what we think an urban space is. Because as I say, urban spaces are built at the will of what we want them to look like.
Welcome to the Green Urbanist podcast, where we explore sustainable placemaking, climate action in cities, and urban rewilding. I'm your host, Ross O'Kelly, an urban designer, educator, and sustainable placemaking consultant. Today's episode is a conversation with Ben and Elliot from Citizen Zoo.
So I'm Elliot, and I'm one of the co-founders of Citizen Zoo, which is an organisation that specialises in urban rewilding, putting communities at the heart of our conservation programmes, and trying to reimagine what the urban landscape could be like if we really do embrace nature.
So I'm Ben. I also work for Citizen Zoo as their Senior Urban Rewilding Officer. So joined in 2021. I've been fortunate enough to take part in various projects, including Reintroduction of water voles, beavers, and some more exciting projects which we'll hopefully delve into onto this podcast today.
We talk about their fantastic work of restoring habitats, reintroducing species, and rewilding the city, working closely with communities so they can realise the benefits of this increased biodiversity. They've got too many fascinating projects to name in this introduction. A few of the ones we talk about are the London White Stork project, reintroducing water voles and beavers into London, using grazing animals to enhance the biodiversity and the habitat in urban green spaces. And we talk more broadly around what does rewilding mean for the city, what are the opportunities, and what are the challenges that we have to overcome to actually make this a reality on a big scale. Great conversation. Thanks so much to Ben and Elliot for joining it. Have a look at their website, citizenzoo.org. The link is in the episode description, and hope you enjoy this episode. To begin with, I'd love to know what your definition of urban rewilding is and how you use that word.
Oh, that's a really, really good question, Ross. And I think, a lot of time is spent on how do we define rewilding generally. I think it means a lot of things to a lot of different people, and we spend a lot of time really having that discussion. So there's sort of two things in which I want to sort of interpret that question with. Well, first thing, I think rewilding is all about embracing ecological processes, giving nature the sort of power at the steering wheel to sort of navigate, the landscape. So it's slightly moving away from the human-controlled outcomes that are really sort of targeted and prescribed, and potentially at larger scale. And then when we bring that to the urban context, we think there's a lot of things that you can do to bring rewilding principles to the urban realm. For example, as Ben mentioned, we've been reintroducing beavers into London. We've been reintroducing we're going to be reintroducing cattle so these animals will be sort of being the stewards of that landscape. So we see that as a real part of embracing rewilding principles. But one thing I would like to say, we're in the heart of an ecological crisis at the moment. One thing that I think rewilding does, one thing that rewilding does, it really puts a slant of hope, and it really does help to sort of engage people. So we talk to a lot of politicians, we talk to a lot of businesses, we talk to a lot of school children. If we say we're doing ecological restoration, they might not get that excited. But if we say the word rewilding, that will really bring a level of excitement that we might not get with other sort of words in our sort of conservation sort of armoury of vocabulary. So I think I would never, if a child says that they want to rewild their windowsill by putting some plants onto that, absolutely on that scale of rewilding that we would embrace that as a word too. So I think it's about using it to leverage conservation action, and getting more people involved is a really important dimension to it.
That's great, thank you. Ben, anything to add to that?
I think Elliot summed it up perfectly there. I think what my biggest thing on that is it's very much just kind of not getting too hung up on the definitions around kind of the work that you're doing in terms of conservation versus rewilding. And like Elliot said, if it captures the imagination of people, gets them excited, particularly in an urban area where people really are quite often nature depleted, if you can breathe a bit of life into their local area in the form of like what Elliot was saying, some windowsill planters, and that gets people excited about wildlife more broadly in the natural world. That for me is part of urban rewilding, and it's exactly what we want to see. We're getting people fired up about the natural world and the wildlife around them.
Awesome, excellent, sounds good. Well, let's bring it to life a bit, and would be really interested to hear about some of your projects that you're doing in and around London. I don't know who wants to sort of kick off with that.
Yeah, I can jump in on that one. So I guess one of our most exciting projects at the moment is on a 42 hectare nature reserve in Kingston called Tolworth Court Farm Fields. So it's actually the borough's largest nature reserve. It sits on the Hogsmill River as well, which is a river that we've been active of where we've released water voles in the past couple of years. So it's a really exciting site for us, not just because of its size, but also its location. So it obviously sits on like a green corridor, a blue corridor running right the way through the borough. So it's an incredibly important site within the Kingston context. Because of its size, we saw quite a lot of potential in terms of could we apply some of the methods and techniques that have been used on more rural rewilding projects, things like low density mixed grazing, and apply that to an urban context, with all the complexities that you have around urban spaces, and thinking about whether those interventions, what they could do in terms of habitat creation and driving kind of a constantly evolving, shifting mosaic of habitats. And I guess our work really started on it in 2022. We got some seed funding from the Greater London Authority to really carry out some baseline surveys, looking at how the site is currently. And really interesting actually. So it's been managed as a neutral hay meadow for the past 20 years or so, with an annual hay cut looking to increase floral diversity. What we found was really actually in terms of the plants and the plant communities on site, it really hadn't changed at all. If anything, it actually degraded. So one of the suggestions was actually in line with what we were thinking in terms about conservation grazing and putting in like a mixed grazing regime. So that's one of the projects we're really excited about at the moment, just because it could be really at the forefront of rewilding within the urban realm, not just in terms of cattle, but also potentially thinking about pigs on that site. And potentially even ponies as well, which would be really, really exciting. We're also doing a big wetland restoration project at the nature reserve. So it used to have the Hogsmill flowing through one corner of it, and actually there's some really nice aerial photos from just after World War II that were taken, where you can actually see it acting as a really effective floodplain. But around about 4 or 5 decades ago, in line with kind of societal trends, the river was straightened and taken out of the site. So we did look into potentially whether we could re-wiggle the river back through that corner of the site and recreate that kind of flood meadow that was once there. But again, in line with the urban nature of the site, it's got some serious complexities. So it's got a sewage pipe running parallel to the river. It's got overhead electricity pylons. So it's even got a mains gas pipe on there. So kind of within the complexities and confines of what is possible within such an urban location, we're now looking to kind of recreate the natural path of the river where possible, with just a large wetland, which would effectively act as in the same way and breathe life into that corner of the site. But it also help with flood prevention as well. So the way that it's been designed, it will hold water from surface runoff, helping to hold floodwaters upstream and slowly let it back into the river going and slow the flow rate downstream. So yeah, that's one project that we're really excited about. We've got some funding from the Heritage Lottery Fund and the second round of funding from the Greater London Authority to kickstart that, and we're looking to get the underway with the digging of the wetland in early spring next year. And hopefully we'll be grazing the site within the next 6 months or so as well, which is really exciting. And we actually had a launch event back in July, which is the first time we actually had 2 cattle come to site. So it was the first time that hooves have set foot on Tolworth Court Farm Fields since the 50s, we believe. Actually, there was a local woman there who said that she was there the last time that there was actually cattle on site, and that was around the 1950s. So yeah, really special to have them there and really exciting about what's to come. And it was about 150 people coming along. So yeah, it was really nice to see some local support for it as well.
That's awesome. I love that. Wow, what a inspiring project. I can't wait to visit to see it in action. And I think you use the word complexity there, and that to me seems to be such a key word when we're talking about urban doing any of these sort of works in an urban setting. Is just more complex, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. More people, more infrastructure, more complexity. But we see them as kind of opportunities, engaging with new diverse audiences and people who otherwise may not be that engaged with nature conservation. So we're often trying to, overcome some of those barriers to make them into potential opportunities to make them kind of more pioneering projects as well.
Amazing. Any other projects you want to sort of just let us know about?
Yeah, well, I think we do quite a lot of stuff across London and even further afield. One thing that I encourage people to do is listen back to some of your previous podcasts, particularly with Sean McCormack of the Ealing Wildlife Group, and listen about the Ealing Beaver Project, which is one of our most exciting projects. So I won't go too much into that detail, but please do go back and listen to those, because that's an incredibly exciting way in which we're trying to rewild London with beavers, and hopefully we're going to expand that work in the coming months and years. A project I actually wanted to just sort of raise here was one we've only just started working on, actually, and it's slightly different to the Ben's project, which is the Tolworth Court Farm is a very defined area. We have about 100 acres there where we're trying to introduce ecological processes through grazing and wetland creation and rewilding people in that landscape. But a project we've just launched is actually called the London White Stork Project. And actually, in many ways, it could be deemed a potentially controversial project. So white storks are a species that some ecologists, some birders will tell you are not a native species to the UK. There is historic records of white storks breeding in the UK, for example, St Giles Cathedral, back at the time of the Battle of Agincourt and stuff like that. And there is records of places across the UK with white storks being named after areas like Storrington in Sussex, and other places. And white storks are regularly on the dinner table of the aristocracy in sort of medieval plus times. So I think there's a lot, to our minds, white storks are a species that, especially such a mobile species, would be deemed to be native to the UK, especially because they do survive very well have been in close European countries, and these are distances for such a large migratory species that coming over to the UK wouldn't be any challenge whatsoever. So you're probably aware, or your listeners might be aware of, the White Stork Project, which is an amazing project led by organisations like the Nep Estate and or organisations like Durrell, where they've over the last sort of 5 years or so, they've brought white storks back to areas in the UK, and now we have white storks breeding in the first time, since for hundreds of years in the UK context, which is really exciting. But one thing we're starting to see as these projects really get established, we're generally starting to see white storks fly across London skies. So if you look at sort of GIGGLE's data, so GIGGLE stands for Greater Green Space Information for Greater London, which is our Ecological Record Centre. If you go back to sort of 2013 or so, I think we had one flyover of a white stork in that entire year. If you go back to 2022, which is the year that we have the most updated records for, we now have over sort of 250 records of white storks flying over London. So we know white storks are now naturally sort of occurring in the skies and also feeding in places across Greater London, which we think is pretty exciting. And if you look across European countries like Portugal or Germany, you see these birds. I've seen it myself. You'll see these birds are highly adapted to living in urban environments. You'll see them nesting on chimneys, nesting on lamp poles, sort of pylon, pylon columns and stuff like that. And another really interesting thing about the bird is what they sort of symbolise, because these birds are birds of hope. They're birds of ecological regeneration. They are incredible, obvious species that it's very difficult to miss as you see these huge birds or flying across the skyline or sitting on top of someone's building. So over the next year, we've got some funding from Rewilding Britain, an amazing organisation that do lots of rewilding across the UK. And we're now going to start the discussion of what it would be like if we could make London more white stork friendly. So, and what interventions we could take across London, so not just focusing on one particular space, but taking a more landscape level approach. Because these big birds, you have to think at high levels of resolution, and then seeing what actions we might be able to take to sort of, see white storks potentially thrive in the future of the London landscape, and using them as a symbol to say, like, again, challenging perceptions about what nature we should expect as we're walking to work, or kids are walking to school. Imagine if there was like a white stork nesting on their school, for example, and that level of nature connection that we just don't really have at the moment. So that's something we're really excited to be delving into over the next sort of year or so, and see where it will take us.
Okay, amazing. I would love to spend just the next hour like diving into all the intricacies of these projects, but I need to remind myself that to move on to the questions I had planned. So thank you for that. That's so great, and I can't wait to maybe we can have you back on in a bit of time and see how those projects are moving forward, and talk more about the ecological aspect of it. But I'd be really interested to know. I'm interested in sort of understanding through this series of interviews how rewilding projects like this, how they are starting to happen, what makes them successful, and then what can other people learn from the success to get more of these projects happening, basically. So I guess for the 2 or 3 projects that you mentioned, can you give me a sense of who has been involved, what are the different players, and what really enabled these projects to happen?
So the Tolworth Farm one, I guess, really came about because we've got quite an active presence in the Kingston area already. So I mentioned that we have a water vole reintroduction project, and that kick-started in 2019 on the Hogsmill River, which is a chalk stream tributary of the Thames that flows right the way through the borough. And so we've been working on that since 2019, and we're still working on that project today. And we've got a really good volunteer support base working on that, and because of the nature of the river going right the way through the borough, that just means that we naturally work on various nature reserves throughout Kingston. And I think as part of that, we also work very closely with Kingston Council, and Tolworth Farm is a Kingston Council owned site, so it kind of came on the radar as a potential site that would be suitable for a project of this kind of nature because of its size, its location next to the river, and kind of our active presence. So it kind of just all really fell into place quite naturally and organically. In terms of kind of, I guess, from our point of view, it was very much about kind of pushing forward the rewilding agenda around that site and our kind of vision for it. And that's kind of what brought us to the place we are now in terms of adapting and adopting some of the techniques you see in more rural rewilding projects to that site that got us to the point, the situation we're in now and the project development. So I think often with these projects, particularly in urban areas when you're kind of reliant on partners' land or often council land and other various landowners, it is really just kind of about networking and partner association and developing good networks where you can actually utilise the kind of strengths of other people to actually develop projects, and that's kind of really what's led us to the project Tolworth Farm Fields. But yeah, like I said, one that we're really excited about, and I think the kind of cross collaboration of different organisations. So obviously it's Kingston Council owned. We're working on it, and a third organisation called the Community Brain, which is a specialist community engagement organisation, also working on it. So I think just like having that cross collaboration really does help to bring these projects to life.
I think maybe another thing to also add to sort of the work that Ben's been talking about there is also, dog walkers. So dog walkers are a really interesting community of people. Ben's a dog walker himself. I've always wanted a dog. My parents didn't let me have a dog as a kid. I was very grumpy about that. But anyway, hopefully I'll get a dog in the future. But dogs and urban wildlife don't always go hand in hand. So one thing, for example, many animals perceive dogs as predators, and you can have these predator-induced stress. So that can you get reduced numbers of birds breeding. People put fipronil, which is sort of tick-controlled lotions on dogs, which can then decimate freshwater invertebrate communities. And also, having, we were looking to work with livestock, you can get issues of dogs, not going, having some conflict with livestock. So one thing we're working at Tolworth is actually trying to proactively and positively work with the dog walking community. We do it with our waterfowl projects as well, doing nature-friendly dog walks and showing actually, your dogs are welcome on these nature reserves, but we want you to try and do that in a nature-friendly way. So it's a really way in which we're trying to turn something that is a negative potentially for wildlife, but turn it into a positive and enable, because obviously dog walking ownership has absolutely increased during the COVID period, and a lot of people in the London area will own dogs, and urban areas will own dogs. So it's how we can try and mitigate that conflict. For example, with water voles, we build dead hedges, which are these amazing sort of hedge-like structures that provide a little buffer area for the water voles to thrive, and people can walk their dogs on the other side of the hedge. So it's just these little things. So it's a challenge that we're really trying to turn into an opportunity. With our white stork project, the challenges, I'm sure there'll be many. For example, pylons can present a problem. Aircraft, collisions can present a problem. White storks potentially pooing on people's cars could present a conflict. But we're going to spend the next sort of year or so investigating all these different challenges that I'm sure white storks will present within the urban realm, and see what sort of solutions might be out there. Learning from places like Lisbon and Munich, where I know they've got white storks living there.
That's great. Thank you for that. I think you've sort of touched on what my next question was, which is, what are the sort of barriers and challenges that you've faced and that you think urban rewilding projects are facing? How have you overcome those, and do you have any advice for overcoming them for other people?
Just to add on, just kind of what Elliot was saying there. I think this is not maybe not so specific to urban rewilding, but just a kind of common issue. Well, probably just throughout the third sector, probably as well. But just general funding, because a lot of what we've been very, very fortunate to receive grant funding for all of our projects to date, which has enabled us to make considerable strides in all of those projects and achieve some major milestones. But obviously, the nature of grant funding is fairly cyclical. It can be 1 to, I think, up to 5 years generally. Of funding, and obviously at the end of that funding period you're kind of back to square one looking for the next phase of funding. So it's always kind of an uphill battle trying to find what you're going to do when that specific block of funding runs out. So I think it's probably just a common problem across all project delivery, and anyone working in the sector, trying to find that kind of consistent unrestricted support that can help you not just with the projects that you're currently delivering, but also project development as well. So like Elliot said, we've been really fortunate to get the Rewilding Britain funding for the White Stork project. But for a while it's been something that we've been wanting to develop, and it's been on our radar for a long time, but we've just not really had that funding in place to actually deliver those kind of that initial phase. So it's really exciting to get that in place. That is kind of an ongoing challenge, and trying to find particularly unrestricted sources of income to help us be a bit more agile and make sure that we can be kickstarting new projects and do some more exciting things. That's always an ongoing battle.
Yeah, no, I think I think the funding gap is huge. I think when we talk about the importance of nature conservation, and people like to try now, there's a whole realm of biodiversity net gain, which is trying to sort of monetize biodiversity to some extent within the development realm, which is going to have a significant impact to biodiversity conservation within, urban spaces. So how that might release some capital to do biodiversity projects, but again, I think putting this financial metric on what is biodiversity is such a incredible. Almost, it's a difficult thing to quantify because it has so many benefits that span so many different spheres. Putting such a sort of arbitrary metric on it could be challenging, but hopefully that will help to release some financial resources. But there was a really interesting paper that I was reading the other day about the huge funding gap that there is in conservation generally, right? So I think if you wanted to look at conservation at a global level and you wanted to bring global conservation where it needs to be in terms of funded, I think globally it would need about £900 billion. And currently, I think we're currently seeing about 130, I think, or something. It's ridiculous, the amount of money, the number, you look at it globally, but the global scale. But the funding gap for nature conservation is huge. It still is huge. It needs to be addressed. And then also making the project sustainable as well is interesting. So once a grant comes in, that's amazing. That funds the project for the next 1-2 years. But then how do you have a really strong exit strategy to make sure that project continues in perpetuity and doesn't end at the end of the funding? So yeah, really interesting problem that hopefully, you know, we can try and find innovative ways to make sure these projects really are sustainable in the long term.
I wanted to understand about your connections with other urban rewilding projects, and have other projects either in the UK or around the world influence what you're doing? Are you in contact with other urban rewilding projects? You know, what's that sort of network like?
Yeah, well, I think urban rewilding is hopefully a growing movement. You know, we're hopefully, for example, well, our beaver project, I know we haven't really touched on it too much, but beavers are a species that live in urban spaces across the European context. You know, Munich and Berlin and Stockholm and places in North America like Vancouver all have beavers living in it. So I was looking at other European capitals and just saying how, you know, you can integrate nature into your cities, you know, can really provide a whole lot of inspiration. For example, and I think Plymouth in the UK context took the jump first when it came to beavers, because they introduced beavers a good few years ago. So there's so much we can learn, you know, by looking to further outside of the UK context to see what the Europeans and North Americans, etc., have been doing. I had the fortune of going to Milan relatively recently and went to the Bosco Verticale, which are these amazing towers that are sort of in the suburbs of Milan, where, you know, they are just, it looks like this incredible green living structure that is these tower blocks coming out, but there's the bird song around it, you know, is absolutely amazing, because every balcony and all this nature is integrated into the fabric of that building. So we now have the techniques, the tools to be able to integrate nature into that real built realm. So as well as the bigger projects like, you know, Ben was talking about Tolworth, but how we can try and drive ecological processes on these larger nature reserves that we're fortunate to have in London, but also how we can weave fabric into the day-to-day of actual civil infrastructure, how we can have more nature along our roads, how can we, with our wildflower verges, how we can have more nature into our towns and cities is going to be incredibly important. And I think by looking at other countries, places like Singapore as well, you know, we can just say, actually, look, guys, you know, we have a in the UK we have a very sort of, I suppose, quite a particular view of what an urban space should look like. But let's remember the urban space is completely a human invention. It's based on human innovation and human construction. If we want to have more nature in our cities, you know, it's just a matter of social and public will, because, you know, we certainly could do that. And by doing that, we'll have so much, you know, there'll be so many more benefits from public health, from sustainability actions to climate change and stuff. So I think looking across the world to see what people are doing is incredibly important.
Yeah, just to add to that, so in terms of kind of inspiration from other projects, I mean, I grew up in Oxfordshire and spent a lot of time just in and around Oxford city centre, so I was just used to seeing cattle grazing flood meadows all over the city, so I'm quite used to having some level of conservation grazing within like an urban realm. So to me it seemed quite normal. And I've also did a stint with Gloucester City Council's ranger team, and they likewise, they just have various nature reserves dotted around the city of Gloucester where they've got cattle grazing all of it. So for me it seems like quite a natural step to have that in London, and obviously you've got people doing it across London as well. So yeah, for me it seemed like a bit of a no-brainer to implement that at a site like Tolworth where you've got enough space for it. But in terms of other inspiration for kind of big rewilding projects, particularly with reference to Tolworth, but obviously for us looking at projects like NEP, rewilding Coombs Head, Wild Ken Hill, all of those projects that are doing amazing things in terms of low density grazing across their sites and applying that to the urban context. But I think that's what really excites us, is about thinking about how we can modify their approaches and apply them to the London realm. And again, thinking about the complexities that we have on those sites and coming up with creative solutions, like Elliot said, about dog walking and engaging with that community to make it a success. So yeah, that's for me what gets me really excited about introducing it to the urban space.
Awesome, great. I really want to move on to the final question just while we have some time left, and this is quite a big one. I'm really interested to get your take on it, and I think you'll have a good strategic view on this, which is if we zoom out a bit and we think about urban rewilding as a wider movement, what would you like to see happening with the urban rewilding movement more broadly? What would be your definition of success? What would you like to see us achieving in the coming years?
Yeah, an incredibly broad question. Yeah, there's so many ways in which we could try and explore that. But I think if you zoom out again a little bit, just looking at the context of where people live generally. So in the UK, 84% of our population live in urban spaces. In London alone, we've about 9 million people living in here. So if we look at where our people are living, they're mainly living in these urban spaces. And do we want people to experience wildlife on a basis where they have to drive somewhere, and it would be a sort of an irregular experience where they have to drive to the countryside to go and get their nature fill? I don't see that as being a sustainable way in which we're really going to inspire people and get nature ingrained into daily life. I think nature is something that needs to be the heart of your daily experience. You need to walk out of your door and realise you're actually living in a community that isn't only dominated by humans, but a plethora of other species. For example, London's got about 16,000 other species in it right now. And if we started to think about those other species being part of our community and just seeing not just be not such an anthropocentric view, just thinking more holistically of all those other species, I think that is incredibly exciting and incredibly important. So what I really want the urban rewilding movement to do is really, as I say, challenge those perceptions of what we think an urban space is. Because I say urban spaces are built at the will of what we want them to look like. So, an ancient woodland is an ancient woodland because that's been crafted by millennia, but an urban space is a dynamic, a transient space. So if we want to choose to have more nature in our cities, that is just a political, a social action that we can actually physically take. So to my mind, success will look like having, the majority of our population being able to experience nature on a daily basis. When I say nature on your doorstep, I truly mean that. I mean, looking out your window and seeing trees, seeing, even if it's buildings, seeing buildings having wildlife integrated into the fabric of those structures, having more species here, like talismanic species like white stork that are helping to inspire people, or species like beavers that are helping to reduce flood risk, or larger areas that have ecological processes unfolding. And I think that then will start to cascade in a whole realm of amazing other benefits. For example, London's wealth is in its sort of diversity, with over 200 languages spoken in London. And one big problem that conservation has, generally speaking, is it's not a diverse sector. It's not very well represented. But if we really started to have more nature, big inspirational projects happening in the London realm, I think would instantly start to draw in more and more people from other backgrounds who realize, like, oh my God, nature is for me because it's something I can daily experience, have part of my daily experience. So I think, so there's two really big things there, but I think mainly it's about what we perceive a space to be and how we engage with nature on a daily basis.
I don't think I can add much more to that. So that's brilliant overview. But I think just the most important thing from my point of view is, humans are the main drivers behind biodiversity decline, whether that be in the urban realm or the rural realm. If we've got a huge number of people living in our cities, we've got a huge number of people on our doorstep to engage. And if we can get them excited about wildlife and wanting to protect it and wanting to get involved with projects and make a difference, then that'll make a huge impact at a big scale. So for me, it's very much the success would look like just getting more people into wildlife conservation and more people excited about that. And whether that's getting excited about rewilding or wildlife conservation, whatever you want to call it, I just think that is the most important thing. Like Elliot said, to have a more diverse group of people involved in wildlife conservation is absolutely essential as well. And particularly here in London, that is the perfect place to get lots of different people involved in it. And for me, that would be the sign of success.
That's great. I love that. Do you think urban rewilding is starting to become mainstream, or do you think it has potential to become more mainstream in terms of projects happening really all over the place?
I certainly hope so. One thing that I think is really, for example, 10 years ago, if we approached someone and said, we're going to put beavers into London, we probably got laughed out the room, that's just something that we just would not have been even deemed as remotely sensible thing to do. But now people have seen it happen, seen it work, and actually it's been really positive. I think that one thing to say, I think it has been a positive, is actually some of the traction and the focus that within the London context that the mayor himself has focused on it. So having the Rewild London Fund, so actually having a whole fund in London that has the word Rewild in it, I think is great. I think that actually came out of some of the discussions that happened at the Glasgow COP. So I think that's a positivity thing. And we even had like Sadiq Khan, he came down to our beaver release day and actually released one of the boxes of beavers, which was fantastic. And subsequently, you look at his social media feed and you will see him regularly talking about rewilding our city and having beavers in our city and staying completely apolitical. I think just having a mayor who is saying these positive things about rewilding our city is incredibly exciting and incredibly important, and that can then hopefully lead to a whole cascade of changes lower down. And I think, so these are things that you wouldn't have seen 10 years ago. So I think, that does mean momentum is growing.
Yeah, I think there's definitely some amazing projects popping up all over London, which I think are really inspiring and are very much harnessing that kind of narrative of rewilding. Obviously, you've got the Enfield beaver reintroduction. They're doing some really cool stuff, kind of at a borough-wide level in terms of rewilding. Elliot mentioned Sadiq Khan's Rewild London fund, but there's also the Rewild London Task Force as well, which is looking at kind of landscape level rewilding across London and thinking about how we can apply that. So that's really ambitious and exciting. But then also you've got projects, people like ZSL, setting up the London Water Bowl Working Group, and thinking about reintroductions kind of en masse across London in parallel with mink eradication projects. So scaling up those efforts to make sure that we can have healthy waterfowl populations across the capital. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot to be excited about. And that also it brings up a lot of opportunities as well. In London, because there's so many stakeholders, so many landowners, cross collaboration is absolutely essential. So the more of these projects that pop up, the more opportunities there are for new projects to sprout out of those as well, and new collaborations to kickstart. So for me, it's a really exciting time to be involved with the urban rewilding sector within the London sphere.
Amazing. Love that. Great to hear the optimism and the positivity. It does seem to me as well like there is a lot happening and a lot of really positive stuff. How important, it seems to me like a lot of these projects are very grassroots led. So how important is it to have the support of like such a powerful player like the mayor, or the central government more broadly?
Well, I think certainly you need both. I think as Citizens Zoo, all of our projects are community-led and community-driven. For example, our waterfowl projects had hundreds and maybe even like over 500 volunteers over the last sort of amount of time. So having that community, having the community desire to engage with nature and make proactive, nature-positive decisions within their sort of sphere of influence is incredibly important. And then political will is an interesting thing, isn't it? Do the politicians lead or do the politicians follow? And I think there's always probably a combination of both. But if we had more people say we want more nature in our cities, that probably encourage a more sort of platform for our politicians to be more bold in that space. And I still don't think, but broadly speaking, politically, there is the level of requirement that we need to combat the situations. We have ecological collapse, etc. So we're not. I don't think we are there. But it's great to see, people like Sadiq Khan taking these bold decisions and saying things about rewilding our city are incredibly important. So I think you need both. You can't have one without the other, and both are very, very, very important.
Fantastic. I think we basically covered most of the questions I wanted to cover, and I think I've gotten a lot from this conversation. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Is there any sort of final words you want to leave us with before we wrap up? And also, please let listeners know where they can find out more about your work.
Yeah, I guess just one shameless plug. Please do go to our website and sign up to our newsletter. We've got a volunteering newsletter if anyone wants to come get involved with any of our practical conservation sessions or survey days, or if anyone would like to support Citizens Zoo, we also do have a membership and donation scheme. So if anyone would like to help us keep driving forward our wider mission, we really appreciate that support. Just say thanks so much for having us along. It's been brilliant. I
think the final thing to say is humans are a very successful creature in terms of we've dominated the planet. You know, we're living in a human-dominated time, but I think humans, we are blessed with imagination. We are blessed to be able to tell people about things. Our abilities to tell stories. I think one thing, if we use those imaginations, that ability to tell stories, to sort of reimagine our urban landscapes and sort of tell stories about how much nature we can have in our daily experience, I think that is really powerful. So I implore anybody who lives in an urban space to look outside their window and try and reimagine about how much wilder it could be, and then go and tell their friends and family that as well, to try and really get a real sort of whole holistic movement happening to sort of revitalise these spaces.